I'm Bill Castle, and this is Free Expression. This program is all about conveying the Christian message from a Catholic point of view and defending the liberty which makes it possible to do that. We talk with creative, interesting people about how to build a clear, effective parish website and charting acts of political violence against religious facilities. Join us, sit back and enjoy some free expression. Most everyone is disturbed when they hear about religious violence, whether it's attacks on Christians in Nigeria or rioting by Hindu extremists in India or Muslim suicide bombers in the Middle East. Americans tend to recoil in horror. We also tend to think of it as something foreign. Events like the deadly shootings at that synagogue in Pittsburgh are rare in the U.S., at least we think of them as rare. The truth is, though, while American religious violence doesn't often reach the level of mass murder, there are more anti-church attacks going on than we might realize. An organization called Catholic Vote has made it a priority to track violence against Catholic parishes, schools, and church-related organizations. Tommy Valentine represents Catholic Vote, and he's with us now. Tommy, paint us the big picture here. How much of an active threat do Catholic institutions really face in the U.S.?
Well, first, thanks for having me on, Bill, and I want to apologize to your listeners in advance. I am losing my voice a little bit in the spring allergy season, but that's okay with me. It tends to happen. To answer your question, we are seeing a wave of violence against Catholic churches that really began in the spring of 2020. So people will remember in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd, there was civil unrest all across the country, and there were a couple other incidents during that spring and summer that led to further unrest. And so Catholic churches were not exempt from that wave of violence and vandalism. There were a handful of incidents in places across the country where the civil unrest was happening. The difference is that while the civil unrest mostly dried up after the summer, the attacks on Catholic churches continue and have even accelerated since then. So Catholic Vote has been tracking this issue for a long time now, and we have documented 301 cases as of today of acts of violence or vandalism against Catholic churches in the United States, dating back to May 28th of 2020. It's been an interesting pattern in that in 2020 and 2021, a lot of the incidents had, a clear motivation of BLM-related ideology or sort of this anti-colonialist, whatever you want to call it. So you would have graffiti with BLM slogans or just anti-Catholic graffiti in general. And then what happened in 2022 after the leak of the Supreme Court's draft opinion in the Dobbs case in early May, the attacks took on a distinctly pro-abortion message. So most of them were cases of graffiti where we saw Jane's Revenge type messages that we've been seeing against pregnancy centers, general pro-abortion messaging, a lot of satanic symbols. And that's been happening over the last 3 years, but it really picked up in the last year where directly, blatantly satanic messages being painted on Catholic churches. There have been cases of arson. I know of at least 2 cases that we've documented where historic churches dating back to the 1800s or even longer, there was one in California that I believe is even older than that, were burned to the ground. There have been other cases of arson where the fire was put out or the attacker or assailant failed to even set the fire in the first place but had tried. There's just all sorts of things. And the thing that is maybe most troubling is that there have been a number of cases where the tabernacle was either stolen or desecrated with consecrated hosts inside. And so I think one thing that's important to point out is that of these 301 attacks that we've documented, none of them are simple cases of theft or burglary. We don't include cases where somebody just stole cash from a poor box outside the church. And those are important issues, and those have a real negative impact on the church, and I don't want to diminish those in any way. But what I'm saying is we want to document cases where the motive appears to be political or spiritual. And so those are really a minority of the cases. of any cases, and of the 300 that we've tracked, the motive appears to be spiritual or political rather than material, because in all 300 cases, this isn't about theft. Churches have all sorts of expensive stuff inside. There's a lot of objects of gold. They have audio equipment. There's all sorts of stuff that could be stolen. And the thing that sticks out to me is that in none of these cases were any of those things stolen. It was a statue was destroyed, or the tabernacle was pried into, or a guy took a sledgehammer to the altar and tried to take out the relics inside. These are people who have a clear spiritual or political motive.
Right, and it sounds like they're pretty knowledgeable about what things are important, bits of Catholic symbolism or sacramental importance, and they're going after the really key stuff.
Absolutely, yeah, and you'll notice that one of the most common threads in these attacks are statues are just being destroyed, where the face of Jesus on a statue is doused in paint, or a statue has its head cut off. And there are even instances where the church has security cameras and surveillance footage has been released where the people are pulling down a statue and then kicking it, stepping on it. It's possible that in some of these cases, people are on drugs or mentally ill, and that's motivating it. But that seems to be a minority. And even in those cases, there seems to be a clear sort of spiritual violence in addition to the physical violence that's taking place.
Is all of this stuff coming from the left? Are there indications that at least some of it might reflect a more traditional anti-Catholicism that you might find among, say, Protestant fundamentalists?
Well, so to answer your question, in terms of the left, absolutely. I mean, there have been a number of instances where some organized pro-abortion groups have disrupted masses and had protests outside. There was one case in New York City where they were actually trying to storm the church, and there was a group of faithful parishioners who were out front trying to prevent that, praying the rosary and just taking all sorts of abuse from a gathered pro-abortion leftist crowd. And to answer your other question about whether these are coming from, Protestant fundamentalists, I get what you're getting at, the more historically typical cases where we've been talking about, 18th and 19th and early 20th century. And the answer is actually no. I mean, I have not found, I've examined every one of these attacks, and I can't think of a single case where there was, a radical Baptist or some sort of evangelical who just really hates Catholics, although it's possible that has taken place. But we've broken this down by state and by metro area where these attacks are occurring. And the thing I find most illuminating in this respect is that the attacks are not taking place in Alabama or Georgia or places where you would traditionally think of as hotbeds for sort of anti-Catholic activity. Now, there have been a couple in those states, but they're clearly pro-abortion motivated. These are taking place most commonly in typically Catholic areas. Boston, it has been a huge hotbed of these attacks. New York City has been another huge hotbed. California, all of these heavily Catholic places that have been so shaped by the Catholic Church, and in some cases even cities that were founded by the Catholic Church, and where there's a heritage and a legacy of immigrants coming over from Ireland and South America and Central America and places like that have a Catholic heritage. And that seems to be where a lot of these attacks are happening. They're not happening in those traditional hotbeds.
There's been a lot of news coverage about assaults on Jews in New York, especially since the Orthodox community is so heavily represented and headquartered in Brooklyn. Have there been any comparable physical attacks on Catholic believers? Has that come on the scene yet?
Yes, I am aware of a handful of instances of those. I will say they're not the most common, but I have heard of a couple of them. There was one church, and I won't say the name, but there was one church where apparently somebody had actually plugged up some of the ventilation system to cause carbon monoxide to flood into the building. And I don't remember exactly how that was discovered, and I don't believe police ever made an arrest in that case, were able to identify a suspect. There have been a couple other cases where, a clergyman sees an attack taking place outside his church. The pastor walks outside and sees the attack taking place and has had threats yelled against him by the perpetrators as they're running away. There haven't been many cases of outright assault. There have been a handful where, I know of one in California where a gentleman tried to break into the church and with a machete and tried to assault a staff member, and he was later detained. So anyway, to answer your question, there are a handful of those cases. That is not very common yet, but that's certainly the fear, and it creates a climate of fear where people are afraid of that. We're not Nigeria where Catholics are being shot as they're coming out of Mass, but there is a climate of fear that's being seen around the country where Catholics don't know what church is going to be hit next. I have a friend who works at a parish here in the United States, and he said that after the Dobbs decision came down in June, they were sweeping the property every night just to make sure that nothing nefarious was going on. And that's not something that pastors and priests should have to do in America.
Well, that begs the question then, is the church really taking steps to try and counter this? Has there been a tightening of security? Are there efforts to work closely with the police and civil authorities? What's going on at the official level?
From the church side, I mean, there's certainly been an effort to increase security at the churches. I know the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops was actually warned by the federal government in June to expect a rise in attacks, which took place. There have been 140 of these attacks have taken place since the Dobbs decision came out. And so there have been, the churches are trying to work on increasing their security. However, a lot of these churches have limited budgets. They certainly can't hire security guards, most of them. They're relying on people like the Knights of Columbus to sort of keep an eye on the property and the pastor. And a lot of them are just in small towns where that's not possible. And this raises the issue of what is being done. You mentioned the police. So I think this is perhaps the most key aspect of this issue is the inaction of the Biden administration to counteract to this problem. We have been researching for each of these attacks if there have been arrests made by local law enforcement. And so we've only been able to find evidence of an arrest in about a quarter of these cases. And all of those were done by local law enforcement. That's actually not a failing by local law enforcement because in pretty much every case it's been reported to the police and the police are working on it. The police, a local county sheriff's department or local county police department or local prosecutor simply does not have the resources or the time to counteract a nationwide epidemic of violence. This is something where federal action is long overdue. We have not found a single instance where federal law enforcement has made an arrest in an attack like this, even though attacks against churches are illegal under federal law under something called the FACE Act. And that's something we've seen used as a bludgeon against pro-life activists because that law was designed to prevent attacks on pro-abortion facilities, abortion clinics, and there were some good people in the Congress who made it apply to churches and also pregnancy centers as well. And so we are seeing disproportionate enforcement of that law against pro-life activists, but we're seeing zero enforcement of it against attacks on churches, even though the suspects are known in some of these cases. And there was even one case up in New York where the local DA dropped the charges. And so the Biden administration really needs to act on this. If this pattern of violence was happening against any other group, we would have seen a federal task force after the first couple dozen attacks. We're now 3 years into this, and we're just not seeing any action. So Catholic Vote has been working to push the administration. We've been working with the new Congress, especially the House Judiciary Committee, to try to get some answers and to push the Biden administration to act on this issue. We've sent a couple different letters to the Attorney General asking him what's being done. We did get a response to one of them where somebody in the Attorney General's office told us we are going to do a 15-day review to make sure that we're devoting all our resources and enforcing, federal law against these attacks. And then since that, radio silence, and that was, I think it was 18 months ago when that happened. So it's just clear that there have been a couple of platitudes from the administration, but they're really not giving this the time and the attention it deserves. And local law enforcement needs their help. They can't combat a nationwide wave on their own. They need federal support, and they're just not getting it.
Well, this certainly sounds like a call for grassroots action, and that's what you guys are all about. How can people follow the work of Catholic Vote and maybe get in touch with you?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, so our website is catholicvote.org, and you'll see we've had the two trackers where we're keeping count of the attacks against Catholic churches and against pregnancy centers. They'll see them right there on the homepage. And if they click on the church link, they'll see a petition we have where we're gathering signatures that people can sign demanding action by the Biden administration to combat this wave of violence. And if people are aware of attacks that have occurred at their parish or at a parish nearby, they can please feel free to send those to us. We have had a number of instances where the local media actually didn't even cover it, but we were made aware of an attack that had taken place, and so we were able to add that to our tracker. And, this stuff is not going in vain because, as I said, we have our government affairs director is working closely with the new Congress on Capitol Hill in D.C. to make sure that they're aware of this issue. And so the Catholic Vote Tracker has actually been cited many different times by members of Congress in letters, and I think it's actually in the congressional record in a few different places when it's come up in committee hearings. So we are working to push this issue. So any information that people have, they can feel free to send it to us. Please sign that petition and make sure your pastor and your diocese are aware of the issue that's going on, because there needs to be a groundswell and outcry from the Catholic faithful that we need help. We can't deal with these attacks. It's not just for these attacks to be happening in America.
Tommy Valentine, CatholicVote.org. Thanks a lot for talking about this. This is certainly a critical concern. And you go take some tea with honey and lemon and see if you can get your voice calmed down. I appreciate you taking time and struggling with this to get this information to us.
Well, thanks very much, and thanks for shining a light on this.
Online communication has become a key concern within the Church. Most parishes and dioceses have websites these days. During the coronavirus pandemic, when religious gatherings were restricted in most parts of the country, live-streamed masses became an essential component of faith life. The Internet is an increasingly important tool for being in touch with believers and seekers alike. But despite all of that, the way information gets presented on the web isn't always visually effective, easily accessible, or even very clear. Anthony Foti is a graphic designer and Internet specialist who has created websites for churches and Catholic organizations, and he's got some thoughts on how to use the web effectively. Anthony, thanks for being with us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Bill. I'm glad to be here.
Give us the basics. What makes for a good church website?
So I think two main components from my experience. So I've been doing graphical design and web design, in the secular world as well as, for diocesan organizations as well as parishes. And the two components that I really see are you have to know the faith. I feel the first part is you have to know the faith, you have to love the faith, and you have to want to communicate it, right? And the second part is that you have to have skill and applications for developing, development software, as well as an eye for design. I used to work for the Diocese of Brooklyn maybe about 10 years ago, and I noticed that would hire outside people who were great at design. They had an excellent eye for design. They went to graphic design schools, but they did not know the faith, nor did they believe it. So they would produce certain things that they just didn't sound coherent. They didn't really go with Catholic theology. Even if you're giving them the copy to put in, they really something was off there. But the design looked good, but it came from an actual believer, or someone who knew the faith and loved the faith and wanted to transmit it. And that's one hand. On the other hand, you would have often people doing things in-house, where you would have people who actually believe in God, believe in the church, believe in her message, but they lacked the skills and the eye for design. So you would have things that were made with word clip art, and it looked very it wasn't appealing, it was very hokey looking, not professional at all. The content was there, what they wanted to say, but they just didn't have the vehicle to carry that across. What I try to do, and from my perspective, is that if you have that zeal, you have that knowledge of the faith, that love of the faith, you take that and you incorporate it with a skill and an eye for design, and then you can really drive the message across.
Yeah, there is a Catholic aesthetic. It's kind of hard to pin down, but there's something about Catholic-themed art and design that stands out. A Catholic website generally will look very different from a Protestant website. What's inherent in that makes something visual Catholic?
Well, I would say definitely we have a huge tradition of iconography and beautiful art, where you brought up Protestantism. The Protestants, are historically iconoclast. So iconoclastic in nature. So they would put in pictures of nature, of symbols from the Bible, and they'll put in scripture and the message they wanted to convey. However, since we're not that, particularly backed up by the Second Council of Nicaea, we're not that. We embrace art, we embrace beauty, right? Whether that be music or chant or imagery, all different things. We embrace those things, and we use those as mechanisms to transmit the faith. So we have a beautiful tradition that goes all the way back to the catacombs. So particularly you're looking at the Renaissance art and medieval art, the iconography of the Eastern Church as well. So you're looking at, that stuff as well. That's really beautiful, as well as Caravaggio and really great Catholic artists and sculptures of the Western tradition. Our religion allows us to utilize that treasure trove to transmit the scriptures, where in Protestantism, you see kind of it's not a Christian, Islam, they have the same kind of idea where they're not allowed to depict things, where we are allowed to depict holy images and holy people, and that definitely aids us in transmitting the faith in a unique way.
Aside from the aspect of beauty and aesthetics, a website has to convey information, and it's been my experience that sometimes they're not organized in a logical way, they're not easy to navigate. What are your thoughts on constructing a website so that it takes you through where it wants to bring you and provides you the information that you're after?
Well, I think a key is simplicity. You want to make things clear. You don't want to have too much stuff going on a website. You want to be consistent with design. Often when people build out websites, there'll be different fonts go on and bright colors and all these things, and those are all jarring, and they take away from the message that you want, the message or the information that you want to convey. So I when I design websites, I try to make things, kind of just clear. You want to have a nice hero spot across the top of that site with of course, I throw in beautiful Catholic art. Say, for example, if I do a website for Good Shepherd Parish, I'm going to put up an image of the Good Shepherd, stained glass image, or the classic depiction of the Good Shepherd. If the church is, Our Lady of Lourdes, I'm going to put up a picture of Our Lady, an image, a statue of Our Lady of Lourdes. So it's kind of like people know this is where they're at. Then right there, you just want to have a very clear menu. So you have, your home, your mass schedule, the things that people want to see. You got to think about why they're coming to this website for. What are they looking for? Most of the people are coming, when it comes to a parish website, they're looking for the mass schedule. They're looking for events that are happening in the parish. They're looking for contact information. So you want to have the information that they're most likely looking for on the upper part of the website. The more they scroll down, the less likely they are to stay on the website unless they find that information quickly. So you want to have things in a very clear way. You don't want too much stuff going on, so people could just find what they need and consume it as easily and quickly as possible.
You're in New York, which is just brimming with creative, talented people, but if you're dealing with a parish that's out in the boondocks, out in the heartland, if you will, they may not have the resources available. How can you find good creative talent?
Definitely do a search. In your parish, see if there's people here. A lot of young people in particular are good at design and good at development. You don't have to be from a big city or somewhere that's known for design to see beauty and see this art and be able to utilize it. I think one of the things I would like to say is that a lot of the stuff I rely on when I do art, whether it's design for print or design for web or a website in general, do flyers or programs or whatever, I rely heavily on the treasure trove of classical and traditional art that we have in the Catholic tradition. So I'll utilize that, put in the message that you want to convey. Perfect example would be, so about a decade ago, I did some work for the Archdiocese where it was about bereavement. So it was a pamphlet. So in the pamphlet, I used La Pietà. Of course, so I put that image in there. It's a very strong image about suffering and grief. So I put that image there. And then I just put in all the text that I want, So it's really, I feel, it's really not that difficult to produce these things, particularly when you have such a variety of Catholic art that's at pre-created Catholic art that's at your fingertips, that you could actually take those things and incorporate it with the message that you want to convey. But again, I mean, back to your question, I would think probably like Google searches, looking up online, but just making sure that the person, you know, is actually a practicing Catholic and actually knows and loves the faith. Because I feel sometimes you'll have people who just, oh yeah, I'll do Catholic art, I'll do this, I'll do that, but they really kind of like don't have that zeal, they don't understand the faith, they don't believe the faith, and they're going to fall short in proclaiming the message that you would like them to send forth.
Where can people go to see some of your work?
So you can go to my website. It's graphicalcatholic.com. So graphical, Graphical, Catholic.com. And I have some, you know, work on there. I have some of the websites that I've designed, some graphics for print, as well as some graphics for web as well.
Anthony Foti, graphicalcatholic.com. Hey, thank you very much, Anthony. Appreciate your thoughts. This is helpful information for anybody who is charged with getting the parish website into shape. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Bill. I appreciate the call.
If you've been listening to these shows online but would like to hear them on the radio, tell your local Catholic station. Free Expression with Bill Castle is available for broadcast free of charge. Ask your Catholic station to contact us by email. Bill Castle at sbcglobal.net. That's BILLKASSEL, all one word, Bill Castle at sbcglobal.net. And don't forget to support your local station. In this time of censorship and so-called cancel culture, Catholic radio is becoming increasingly important as an alternative media source. Our programming is based on the Word of God and the teaching of His Church, and we bring you the factual, truthful information you aren't getting from the mainstream media. Support Catholic Radio. Your generosity keeps Catholic outlets on the air, and donations to broadcast ministries can be tax-deductible. And please, let me know what you think about these shows. Tell me what books you're reading, what media you follow, what sort of music communicates with your soul. I'd love your suggestions on topics we might explore that touch the lives of Catholics today, important ideas we might discuss, interesting people we might speak with. Email me at billcastle@sbcglobal.net. Be with us next time when we explore other aspects of religious communication and look deeper into the great Christian heritage of free expression. Free Expression with Bill Castle is a production of Good Shepherd Catholic Radio and Company Publications, where good books, good music, and good radio are always good company. Dan Curris provided technical assistance. Theme and incidental music are by Dan Adam. The program was produced and directed by Bill Castle. This is Good Shepherd Catholic Radio.